There is a quiet pressure that shapes modern life. We are told, directly and indirectly, that the purpose of life is to be happy, that happiness should feel stable, that painful emotions are signs that something is wrong, and that with the right methods we should be able to remove stress, fear, sadness, insecurity, and self-doubt from our inner world. It sounds hopeful, even sensible. But Russ Harris begins the happiness trap by suggesting that this entire way of thinking may be one of the main reasons so many people feel exhausted, dissatisfied, and stuck. The trap is not that happiness is bad. The trap is that we chase it in ways that make us less free. We spend enormous energy trying to avoid discomfort, control our thoughts, and manufacture the right emotional state before we allow ourselves to live. We tell ourselves we will make the change after we feel confident. We will have the conversation after we calm down. We will pursue the dream after fear disappears. We will rest after worry stops. But life keeps moving while we wait. Harris invites us to consider a different possibility. Maybe the problem is not that we are failing to control our minds well enough. Maybe the problem is that we are trying to do the impossible. Maybe a meaningful life does not depend on feeling good all the time. Maybe it depends on learning how to make room for difficult inner experiences while still moving toward what matters. This is the heart of acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, the framework behind this book. And what makes the book powerful is that it does not stay abstract. It brings these ideas into ordinary life: stress, work, relationships, self-criticism, uncertainty, grief, ambition, and the constant noise of the thinking mind. So as we move through this book, the invitation is not to become emotionless, endlessly positive, or perfectly mindful. It is to become more flexible, more present, and more able to live by values rather than fear. The book begins by questioning some of our deepest assumptions. Many people believe that happiness is the normal state of a healthy person and that if they are anxious, lonely, ashamed, angry, or discouraged, something has gone off course. From that belief comes a second belief: painful thoughts and feelings must be controlled, reduced, or eliminated as quickly as possible. Harris argues that these assumptions set us up for struggle. Human beings are not designed to feel pleasant all the time. We are designed to survive, and survival requires a mind that notices danger, remembers pain, anticipates loss, and compares us with others. The mind is always asking, what could go wrong? What did you do badly? What might you lose? How are you falling short? In small doses, this can be useful. But when we interpret the mind's constant warnings as evidence of personal failure, we begin to fight with our own inner experience. We turn discomfort into emergency. We resist sadness as if sadness should not exist. We panic about panic. We become ashamed of shame. We try not to think certain thoughts, and in doing so we give them more power. The struggle becomes the problem. Harris does not say that pain is imaginary. He says that the secondary struggle around pain often intensifies it. This is why the trap can feel so confusing. The harder we work to get rid of the discomfort, the more central it becomes. The more we organize our lives around not feeling bad, the smaller our lives become. We avoid conversations, opportunities, commitments, challenges, rest, intimacy, and honesty because all of those things may bring discomfort with them. So the book asks a fresh question. Instead of asking how to feel better first, what if we asked how to live better now, with all the complexity of being human included? One of the clearest distinctions in the happiness trap is the difference between pain and suffering. Pain belongs to life. To care is to risk loss. To love is to risk grief. To grow is to risk uncertainty. To attempt anything meaningful is to risk disappointment, embarrassment, failure, and self-doubt. There is no mature life that does not involve vulnerability. But Harris shows that a second layer often gets added on top of this unavoidable pain. We do not simply feel afraid, we start fighting the fear. We do not simply feel sad, we judge ourselves for being sad. We do not simply remember something painful, We tense against the memory and exhaust ourselves trying not to feel what is already present. In ACT terms, this added layer comes from struggle, avoidance, and fusion with the mind. And it is often what makes distress feel unbearable. This is important because many people assume their suffering proves they are weak or damaged. Harris takes the opposite view. Much of that suffering comes from perfectly understandable strategies that simply do not work very well over time. We distract, suppress, numb, overanalyze, reassure, procrastinate, argue with ourselves, or avoid the situations that trigger discomfort. These strategies may bring temporary relief, but they usually carry a cost. They shrink our world. We stop showing up for what matters. We become more fearful of our inner life. And slowly, the effort to stay comfortable becomes more restrictive than the original pain itself. Harris is not asking us to welcome pain with enthusiasm. He is asking whether we can stop wasting so much life energy fighting what cannot be fully controlled. That shift is not passive. It is deeply practical. When the struggle softens, attention becomes available again. Choice becomes available again. Meaning becomes available again. And from there, a different kind of life becomes possible. Acceptance is one of the most misunderstood words in psychology, and Harris works hard to correct that misunderstanding. Acceptance is not resignation. It is not pretending to like pain. It is not giving up, approving of suffering, or refusing to change what can be changed. In this book, acceptance means opening up to thoughts, feelings, urges, and sensations as they are, instead of automatically going to battle with them. It is a willingness to let inner experience exist without handing control of our life to that experience. This matters because so much human effort is devoted to emotional control. We try to push anxiety away, force confidence to appear, delete sadness, neutralize anger, and silence painful memories. But inner life rarely obeys force for long. The more we insist that a feeling must disappear, the more threatening it can become. Harris suggests a different response. Notice what is present. Name it. Feel where it lives in the body. Make a little room around it. Let the sensation rise and fall without treating it as a command. That may sound small, but it changes the relationship entirely. Instead of being trapped in reaction, we become capable of response. Acceptance creates space between the experience and the struggle. It says, this feeling is here right now, and I do not have to like it, but I also do not have to let it run the whole show. This stance can be especially powerful with anxiety, grief, anger, and shame. The aim is not to erase them. The aim is to stop adding resistance on top of them. Once there is less resistance, the emotions often become more workable, less terrifying, and less likely to define the entire moment. Acceptance, then, is not surrender to pain. It is a refusal to waste life in endless combat with the mind and body. Another core insight in the book is that thoughts are powerful not simply because they exist, but because we fuse with them. When fused, thoughts do not appear as passing mental events. They feel like truth, law, identity, or prediction. A thought such as I am not good enough can shape an entire day, a career path, a relationship, even a person's sense of self. A thought like I cannot handle this can become a reason to stop. A thought like everyone is judging me can close down openness before any evidence appears. Harris introduces cognitive defusion as a way of loosening that grip. Defusion means seeing thoughts for what they are: words, stories, images, memories, mental habits. It does not mean proving them wrong one by one. It does not require replacing every negative thought with a positive one. In fact, Harris is skeptical of trying to out-argue the mind at every turn because the mind is endlessly inventive. Instead, defusion changes the frame. Rather than saying I am a failure, you begin to notice I am having the thought that I am a failure. Rather than hearing the thought as a verdict, you hear it as an event taking place in awareness. That slight shift can be enormously liberating. The thought may still appear, but it no longer has to dominate behavior. Harris offers many simple ways to create that distance, often playful or disarming, because the point is not to defeat the thought, but to reduce its authority. When thoughts become less solid, they lose some of their ability to direct our choices. We can hear the mind's commentary without automatically organizing life around it. And that is one of the great freedoms the book offers, not a silent mind, but a mind whose noise no longer has final say. Harris repeatedly reminds us that the mind is a meaning-making machine. It tells stories all day long. It explains the past, predicts the future, compares the present to imagined standards, and turns experiences into identities. Some stories are useful. They help us plan, remember, and make sense of the world. But many stories become cages. I always ruin things. I am too late. Other people have it figured out. I cannot trust myself. If I feel afraid, it means I should stop. If I feel sad, it means I am broken. Harris does not ask readers to stop having stories. That would simply become another impossible standard. Instead, he asks us to recognize story as story. Once we see the mind as a narrator rather than an unquestionable authority, something softens. We become less trapped by its drama. We notice that the mind often repeats old themes with remarkable confidence, even when those themes are incomplete, exaggerated, or outdated. This insight matters because many people spend years trying to repair life by repairing the story first. They think they must resolve every inner contradiction and achieve perfect mental certainty before they can act. But Harris suggests the opposite. Action can lead the way. Meaning can be built while uncertainty and self-doubt still speak in the background. The mind may go on narrating, judging, warning, and comparing. The goal is not to exile the narrator. The goal is to stop confusing narration with destiny. A great deal of suffering comes from living everywhere except the present moment. We revisit the past, replay what should have been said, imagine better versions of ourselves, rehearse future disasters, and wander through arguments that have not happened yet. Harris presents mindfulness as an antidote to this drift, but in a very grounded and practical way. Mindfulness here is not about emptying the mind or entering a permanently calm state. It is about noticing what is happening now with openness and attention. The breath, the feet on the floor, the feeling in the hands, the sounds in the room, the contact of the body with the chair, the task that is actually in front of us. By returning to direct experience, we loosen the mind's dominance. We become less absorbed in stories and more available to life. Harris treats present moment awareness as a skill that can be practiced in ordinary situations, not only in meditation. While washing dishes, listening to a partner, walking down the street, sitting in discomfort, or taking one difficult next step, the present moment becomes a place of contact rather than escape. This is important because values can only be lived now. Love happens now. Honesty happens now. Courage happens now. Attention happens now. The mind may insist on staying elsewhere, but the present moment is where action becomes real. Mindfulness does not remove pain. It gives us a steadier place from which to meet pain and a clearer view of what is actually required in the moment instead of what the mind keeps insisting about the moment. Another subtle but powerful idea in the happiness trap is the observing self. Harris points out that beyond all the changing content of experience, thoughts, emotions, memories, roles, sensations, and stories, there is also awareness itself. There is a part of us that can notice fear without being only fear, notice shame without being only shame, notice the story of failure without being permanently reduced to it. This perspective can feel relieving because many people are imprisoned not just by emotions, but by identity labels. I am anxious. I am damaged. I am weak. I am difficult. I am behind. I am not the kind of person who can do this. Harris invites readers to loosen those identifications. Experiences happen within us, but they do not define the totality of who we are. The observing self is not a grand metaphysical claim in the book. It is a practical shift in perspective. Once we realize that we can witness our own inner weather, we are less likely to confuse a passing state with our essential nature. We do not have to deny pain. We simply do not have to become it. That opens a valuable space for self-compassion, patience, and wiser action. We stop saying this feeling proves what I am, and start saying this feeling is here, and I can relate to it differently. If acceptance, defusion, and mindfulness were the whole story, the book would still be useful, but it would remain incomplete. Harris insists that psychological flexibility matters because it helps us build a meaningful life. That is where values come in. Values are the qualities of action that we want to stand for. They include things like kindness, honesty, courage, curiosity, patience, creativity, contribution, connection, self-respect, learning, presence, and compassion. Values are not goals that can be checked off and completed forever. They are directions in which we keep traveling. This distinction is deeply important. You can achieve a goal and be done with it. You cannot finish being loving. You cannot permanently complete courage. You cannot fully tick off authenticity. These are living directions, renewed in each moment. Harris invites readers to ask not merely what they want to get, but how they want to be and what kind of life they want to participate in. This question changes the entire emotional landscape. If comfort is the main measure, then any fear or sadness seems like evidence of failure. But if values are the measure, then discomfort may simply be part of moving toward something important. You can feel nervous and still act with honesty. You can feel grief and still act with love. You can feel self-doubt and still act with commitment. Values give suffering context. They remind us why the hard parts are worth bearing. Harris also shows that values operate across domains: work, relationships, health, personal growth, community, spirituality, learning, and daily conduct. A person may value presence in parenting, integrity in work, tenderness in partnership, courage in personal growth, and contribution in service. When life becomes organized around values, it begins to feel less random and less hostage to mood. You may still have painful days, but you are no longer asking mood to provide your direction. You already have direction. And that is one of the book's most stabilizing messages. Once values are clear, the next challenge is action. Harris is very realistic here. The mind often tells us that action should wait until we feel prepared. It says, first get rid of the anxiety, then begin. First become confident, then speak. First stop overthinking, then decide. First feel motivated, then change your habits. But the book argues that this sequence is usually backwards. Confidence often grows from action, not before it. Clarity often comes through movement, not endless thinking. Motivation often follows contact with meaningful effort, not passive waiting. Committed action means taking steps guided by values, even while uncomfortable thoughts and feelings come along for the ride. This is not reckless action. It is thoughtful, values-based action taken with willingness. Sometimes the steps are very small. One phone call, one boundary, one honest sentence, one walk, one application, one apology, one session, one page, one moment of listening instead of defending. Harris emphasizes this because the mind loves grand standards. It often tells us that if we cannot do something perfectly or boldly, there is no point starting. But meaningful lives are built in steps, not dramatic declarations. Committed action asks, what is the next doable move in the direction that matters? Then it asks the same thing again tomorrow. Over time, this changes identity. We stop seeing ourselves as people who are waiting to live and start becoming people who can move with fear, move with uncertainty, move with sadness, move with imperfection. That shift may be one of the most empowering ideas in the book. No practice of acceptance or values-based action is clean and linear. Harris makes room for setbacks because any real human process includes them. There will be days of avoidance, emotional overwhelm, self-criticism, numbness, old habits, and discouragement. The mind will use those moments as evidence that nothing is working. It will say, "See, you are back where you started." Harris counters this by encouraging a kinder and more flexible stance. Progress is not measured by never struggling again. It is measured by how we relate to struggle when it returns. Do we tighten into shame or make room? Do we obey the old story or notice it? Do we wait for the perfect inner condition or take the next small valued step anyway? Self-compassion matters here because harshness often deepens entanglement. If every setback becomes a reason for self-attack, then the mind gains another weapon. But if setbacks are treated as part of learning, then recovery becomes faster and more honest. The book quietly suggests that maturity is not emotional control. It is the ability to remain open, responsive, and values-oriented when life becomes messy. In that sense, self-compassion is not a luxury. It is a practical requirement for sustained change. What makes the happiness trap enduringly useful is the way it translates ideas into daily practice. In relationships, the book encourages presence, openness, and values-guided communication rather than waiting until every feeling is resolved. At work, it helps people notice the stories of inadequacy, comparison, and perfectionism without letting those stories dictate every move. In moments of anxiety, it suggests grounding in the body, making room for sensations, and choosing action based on importance rather than comfort. In periods of sadness or low motivation, it brings attention back to values and small behaviors that reconnect us with life. In self-judgment, it teaches distance from the inner critic and a gentler stance toward human limitation. The tools in the book are not meant to create a polished personality. They're meant to support real living in imperfect conditions. That may be why readers often find the book reassuring. It does not demand that they become different kinds of people before life can begin. It shows them how to live as they are, with more flexibility, more awareness, and more intention. The ordinary moments become the training ground. The uncomfortable meeting. The vulnerable conversation. The quiet evening when the mind starts narrating failure. The decision to show up for exercise, parenting, friendship, rest, or creative work even when mood does not cooperate. Harris keeps returning to this practical truth. Life is lived in moments, and each moment offers the chance to move toward or away from what matters. By the end of The Happiness Trap, the promise of the book becomes clearer and more humane. Russ Harris is not trying to convince us that pain does not matter or that inner struggle can be solved by one insight. He is inviting us into a different relationship with the whole project of being human. The goal is not to win a war against sadness, fear, anger, shame, or thought. The goal is to stop sacrificing life to that war. Happiness, in this book, is no longer something to seize and secure forever. It becomes lighter, less forced, more like a natural visitor than a possession. What matters more is building a life that feels honest, engaged, and deeply lived. A life shaped by presence instead of constant mental escape. A life shaped by values instead of mood. A life spacious enough to hold grief and gratitude, fear and courage, uncertainty and movement. That is why the message of the book stays with people. It offers relief, but not by promising permanent comfort. It offers freedom, but not by removing complexity. It offers a way forward that is sturdy enough for real life. And perhaps that is the deepest wisdom here. You do not need to wait until your mind becomes peaceful to start living meaningfully. You can begin where you are. You can make room for what you feel. You can listen to your values more than your fear. And step by step, moment by moment, that is how a fuller life is built.